Good morning, everyone. I'm Swami Chidbrahmananda. All my friends back in D.C. It'd be nice if there was a great big Zoom board in front of me with all your faces there so I can see you again. It's a delight to be here this morning and to be able to speak and share the heart, share some ideas, and just to be reminded of the fact that we are completely inundated, soaking, and delighting in the divinity everywhere all the time. And to get an opportunity to talk from that place, to get an opportunity to speak of those things is always amazingly encouraging and really one of a wonderful possibility for all of us. I've been thinking about these things, and they kind of sum up. I think each talk always turns into sort of a summation of where life is at and what's going on and what's happening. Sometimes I almost feel like when I speak, I'm just reading the events of being, the events of a day, and making sense of them, understanding them, because we sit in a moment, and that moment is divine, and that moment contains all the world's scriptures, and all of our perception is our only source of knowledge. And so to have the divine pouring in to us and teaching us and growing from it, is such a beautiful opportunity and such a beautiful thing to be able to do. There's a great poem from Hafiz that I want to read this morning called "I Know the Way That You Can Get." And I do know the way that I can get sometimes. He says, "I know the way that you can get when you have not had a drink of love. Your face hardens, your muscles cramp. Children become concerned about a strange look that appears in your eyes, which even begins to worry your own mirror and your own nose. Squirrels and birds sense your sadness and call an important conference in a tall tree. They decide which secret code to chant to help your mind and your soul. Even angels fear that brand of madness that arrays itself against the world and throws sharp stones and spears into the innocent and into one's own self. Oh, I know the way you can get if you have not been drinking love. You might rip apart every sentence your friends and teachers say, looking for some hidden clause. You might weigh every word on a scale like a dead fish. You might pull out a ruler to measure from every angle in your darkness the beautiful dimensions of a heart you once trusted. I know the way you can get if you have not been having a drink from love's own hands. That is why all the great ones speak of that vital need to keep remembering God. So you will come to know and see him as being so playful and just wanting to help. That is why Hafiz says, "Bring your cup near me, for all I care about is quenching your thirst for freedom. All a sane man can ever care about is giving love." That idea of opening up trust and opening up playfulness, opening up the heart, so we don't harden, we don't become calloused by the experience of life. Authentically False is the title. I chose it partly because it was an intriguing idea, but also because I think it's the state of where we're at in our ignorance and in our delusion. There's all this talk of realness, of wokeness, of being authentic, our authentic selves. And we talk about it as if it's actually something we could do, as if it was just something we need to turn on, without understanding the deep, amazing implications of it. Authentic to what? What is the measure we're using to be authentic? How do we know what real is? How do we understand what we are? You know, I grew up a suburban boy, and well within the parameters of mainstream and normal. And I remember when I first moved to San Francisco and saw all of the colorful characters there and all of the delightful cultures mixing together, and these colorful, just brightly presented people. And I thought, gosh, what am I? You know, I just wear Gap khaki pants and button-down shirts and loafers, you know, this straight out of a Macy's magazine, sale catalog. And I went through this period in my very early 20s thinking, what is my look? Who am I? And experimenting with some hilarious things, you know, which was one of the wonders of living in San Francisco, is that you were permitted to try crazy things. And so I tried all these different styles and ultimately came back to khakis and button-downs because I didn't know how to find a self, an authentic person that I would dress in the morning and how I would look. And now look what's happened. What a journey it's been. So I want to talk about that this morning. How do we know? How do we become authentically real? How do we become authentic? And what is that all about? Because the divine has built it right into the creation, built the whole story, everything there. He says in the Upanishads, if creating, I enter my creation, the self-reflected, what is there to bind me to it? How am I going to stay there? How am I not going to slip right out of it again, being the divine, being God? What is there to go out from it when I go out, or to stay within it when I stay? Pondering thus, and in answer to this thought, he made prana, that life energy. And from prana, he made desire. And from desire, he made ether, air, fire, water, earth, the senses, the mind, and food. And from food, he made vigor, penance, the Vedas, the sacrificial rites, and all the worlds. Thereafter in the world he created names, and the number of the elements he thus created was 16. I read this and I was tickled by it in a way. I had some fun with it, thinking about God pondering these kinds of things as he's creating this amazing experience of life for us. And when I looked at the order in which he made things, you know, first of all, creating that energy, that movement, that vibration, that gives change, or the seeming change, to the experience of life. And that from that he made desire. You know, he was looking for something to bind himself into this creation if he entered into it, and something to come out from when he left it or leaves it. And in that, he created desire, and from desire, he made all of the material world. And I spoke about this yesterday in the vlog, that the very fact that the essence of this material world is desire. It's created from desire. And it was created for the Lord to bind himself into this play so that it's interesting. You know, if it was just a simple little crossword puzzle, it'd be fun for an hour or two, and then you'd be done. But we're here for 100 years, maybe thousands of years, depending on your philosophies. How is the Lord going to stay interested? And so he created desire, and from desire created all of this material world. And there's a big message in that, too, also as a side note. The fact that the world is created from desire, according to this Upanishad, that is its essence, and that's what its fruit is. If you eat of this world, you'll only want more. Every pleasing and enjoyable thing in this world leaves an echo for more in the mind. You cannot be sated once and for all. You cannot eat just one meal and say, that was enough for the rest of my life, or one candy bar, or one tortilla chip. There is no way to find fulfillment here. If you take enjoyment in the world, you step onto a stationary bicycle that you're going to have to pedal madly for the rest of your life, and pedal harder with every day, because that's the strange thing about this world, is you get used to things and you need a little bit more. That one cup of coffee the first time was quite a whiz-bang experience, and the second and third one were quite disappointing until you had to add another cup, until you get to the point where you're having 6 or 8 cups a day and then realize, oh gosh, I need to cut back on my coffee intake. Therein lies the world. And this very interesting thing here that he says that from this prana, from desire, he created this world, and he created food, something to sustain us, the sustenance. But what's very interesting is that he created this desire that traps us into this loop of ever wanting more and ever traveling in roundabout circles trying to get to it. Out of food, he makes all of the means for escape. I found that beautiful. From food, he made vigor, that strength, that engagement, that involvement. Penance, that covering our faults, that balancing our karmic table. The Vedas, the sacrificial rites, and all the worlds. Now, I had to think about that one because, it was fitting very nicely into my story there beginning when I was thinking from food, he made all the means of getting out, of exiting this game, of winning and going home. And so I could see that with vigor, that necessity for engaging in our practices and engaging in austerities and engaging in studies, that awakeness, that alertness, that just strength in being able to go through these things was necessary. Penance, of course, the Vedas, the teachings of truth, enlightenment, and the sacrificial rites. And then he says all the worlds. And I was thinking, oops, well, it works for all of them except for that one. But then I thought, no, you see, all of the worlds also will teach you truth. Will teach you if you pay attention, if you discern between the changing and the unchanging, the real and the unreal. That if you do pay attention to life, you will learn by default. All the worlds are part of the plan for bringing you out of this delusion. That's why they will not be able to fulfill you. They'll keep you looking your whole life. You won't stop searching until you find the real. It's inevitable for every one of us. And it's built into the game, which is quite a marvel. He says, as the flowing rivers whose destination is the sea, having reached it, disappear in it, losing their names and forms, and men speak only of the sea. So all of these rivers flowing from all of these different spots on the planet, each one of them having names, when they flow into the ocean, we don't list their names anymore. They've surrendered their separateness, they've surrendered their identity, and become part of the whole. He says, so these 16 parts, the 16 created things we just talked about, created out of his own being by the self, the eternal seer, having returned to him from whom they came, disappear in him, their destination, losing their names and forms, and people speak only of the self. Then for man the 16 parts are no more, and he attains to immortality. So this beautiful notion that like a river we're flowing toward the divine, awake and alert, discerning constantly between what is true, always looking for a deeper understanding, always in search of that authenticity, that realness, that one thing that flows through us and somehow is not generated in us. To touch that place, to find it. Vivekananda says that in order to get to that, in order for that river to have its shortest flow to the ocean, as it were, he says, in order to attain that liberation, in order to be free, we must first hear about Brahman, hear about God, hear about this one without a second. Get a notion of it. And hearing of it can come through any source. It can come through the ears for certain. It certainly can come through the eyes as well. If you tune yourself to look for the divine, if you tune yourself to hear the subtle truth behind the apparent truth, behind the relativity, when you realize that there has to be a standard behind which this relativity gets all of its meaning from, that absolute. If you hear of that, if you begin to suspect that, even in yourself, the first time I was told there's an unchanging self within you, a part of you that never changes and doesn't move, the observer, the witness of this world. As soon as I heard that thought returned to me every now and then over the 25 years I've been doing this, and slowly coalesces into an experience of reality, of the way that things are. It becomes a refuge. It becomes a place of sanity, a place of equilibrium, a place of objective reality, of knowing, and seeing the truth in all things that are dancing before this unchanging self. So we must first hear about Brahman and then think or reason it over. That's one of the important things about spiritual life, about religion. I think a way that has been lost to much of modern religion is that it's not just through some belief, blind belief, without thought, without contemplation, without intelligence that we come to these things. It's hearing these spiritual truths and then contemplating them, reasoning through them, testing them, poking at them, digesting them, letting them become part of the relative world that we've created in our mind, and to become what they call vidya, light, that which leads us home, that which doesn't take us further into the delusion, further into egoism and separateness and smallness and weakness, but takes us out toward strength, toward unity, toward inspiration, toward oneness, toward love, the absolute freeness of it all. All happiness and misery are inextricably connected with the senses, and the body is necessary to experience them. So all of our ups and downs, all of this craziness of life is tied to the body, tied to the senses. That's where all of our loss of balance, our loss of harmony, our loss of contentment, our loss of peace, they all come through this identity with body and mind, that all of the things of the temporary world are contained within them. And through the body, they touch us, seemingly. They affect us, seemingly. And I say seemingly because we can't be affected and we can't be touched. We are that infinite oneness, that spirit, that same witness peering through the eyes of each one of us, whose nature is love and intelligence, and whose gift to us is that and existence. So we've created this game. We've bound ourselves into it with desire. The Lord is playing and has gotten stuck in his own game, and we've put our name upon him, and we've called him our individual self, our lower self. And through this body and this mind that we now have owned and identified ourselves with, we experience partiality, we experience smallness, we experience the finite, we experience hunger and need, discontent, all of these things that are part of a game because the self that's playing is ever free and ever pure and ever blissful. No law can give you this freedom. You are free. And we've talked about this in the past. What is freedom? Freedom is contentment. You see, that's one of our big misunderstandings. One of our first misunderstandings is that freedom means I can do whatever I want, because we assume want is a given. Why? Because we live in this material world that's created from desire, right? Prana and then desire is born of that. From desire, all of these physical elements that we're engaged in. And so in that context, which we accept as real, but is not, that's the false. And that is where this authentically false idea comes from. That we assume this is the real. We assume this table is real, this experience is real, this body is real, this mind is real, this is the reality. And in it I will find my authenticity. In it I will find out who I am. In it I will define myself. And by doing that, we bind ourselves to need and to smallness and to incompleteness and to a constant hunger and a constant searching, because it's through this body that we experience all of that. And so we bind ourselves nice and tight in here. And someone says, you're free. And the first thing we do is completely misunderstand that notion of what it is to be free. Oh, I can go do whatever I want. No, you have to hear about it, then you have to sit and think about it and contemplate it. Does freedom mean a freedom to hunger, a freedom to search for a fulfillment of a desire? That's slavery. That's not freedom. Freedom is to be without desire. Freedom is to be without need, without longing, without any sense of smallness or danger or other, or lack of love, or too much abuse and anger and jealousy. It's freedom from all of that. It's the freedom to open up to the perfection of being this moment. It's the freedom to know your nature has nothing to do with things that come and go. It's being established in that silent oasis, the image of the beloved, that is your very existence, that is your very loving, that is your very knowledge. That is freedom. That is the authentic self. That is to know the truth. And no law can give you that freedom. You are free. Nothing can give you freedom if you have it not already. The Atman, that soul, that spirit, that divinity, is self-illumined. It is its own light. It's all that you need. Everything that you've wanted, everything that you've been looking for. That reflection in the mirror that you've fallen in love with is only you. You don't need to go find them, it. You don't need to hunger for the reflection. You are free. The Atman is self-illumined. Cause and effect do not reach there. And there's another statement that can float through the mind, and if you don't stop it and look at it, contemplate it, you can't get the amazing bouquet of teaching that lies in that idea. That you, the watcher, the witness, looking through this mind, using the instruments of sense in this body, that you that is separate and apart, cause and effect cannot reach that you. Cause and effect, which is karma, which is confusion, which is smallness, which is adjective, it can't reach you. You cannot be harmed by it. You cannot be encouraged by it. It cannot be added to you. It cannot be taken away from you. You are free, and that freedom exists only in that space beyond the body and beyond the mind. The Atman is self-illumined. Cause and effect do not reach there. And this luminosity, this self-illumined Atman, what is the light that it's emanating, that's wafting off of it? This luminosity is freedom. Freedom from desire. Freedom from anxiety. Freedom from mortality. Freedom from worry and concern. Beyond what was or is to be is Brahman. It's not caught in time. This silent self within that has watched your body grow up, that has watched you go through schooling, who's accepted the degrees and the processes. This self who has been so patient in the body through all of its waking and all of its dreaming and all of its dreamless sleep. This you that is present first thing in the opening of the eyes in the morning. This you is beyond time. It's beyond your past. It's not in the control of your past. It's not subject and bound to your future. It's not anxious about what's coming. It's not concerned about what will happen. It has no memory of what is behind it. It's isness itself, the rich and beautiful and pure moment. You are beyond the body, beyond the mind, and untouchable by time, space, or causation. Freedom is that one real thing, not to be attained, but the real nature of your soul, of your condition. So this is where we live. This is the reality in the teaching of the Vedas and all the world's religions together. They're all singing this same song, that you, the manifestation of the Beloved, who is absolute and pure, one without a second, is living his line of the scriptures through your small self in this world that he created, she created, it created, themselves, itself, their self, pouring in desire, giving you all of this material whose nature is temporary, momentary, to play with the idea of bondage, to play with the idea of limit, of smallness, of weakness, of fear, of love, of anger and jealousy. All of these notions that only come when you're identified with a part, an individual, a separate nature from the whole. He tells us in the Avadhuta Gita, he tells us an amazing little, just in a couple of sentences here, is just such a beautiful, small little nugget of wisdom, of wonder for us. He says in chapter 7, the 10th verse, if the yogi, if the spiritual seeker is always related to knowledge and perception, to duality and unity, how can he be free? All right, he's drawing an allusion to what we just talked about. If you insist on constantly being related to everything around you, you know, that's over there, this is over here, he's taller, she's shorter, he's richer, you know, he's poorer. The constant comparisons where you're just drawing lines between yourself and everything that's delivered to you in your mind through your senses, constantly relating things in time, space, and causation, building a castle of thinking within your own mind. He says, how can you be free if you're doing that, relating yourself to all of these finite, passing things that in their essence are unreal and born of desire? How can you find your way home? If the yogi is always related to knowledge and perception, to duality and unity, how can he be free? How can a yogi be natural and free from attachment here? How is it even possible? And in the last sentence, he gives us a beautiful, beautiful remedy. He is the enjoyer of the pure. He is the enjoyer of the stainless. And he is the enjoyer of the homogeneous being, that pure, stainless, and homogeneous being. And when I read that, I thought to myself, I want to know that pure, that stainless, that homogeneous being. I want to understand what it is to be the enjoyer of those qualities, those intrinsic essences of reality. I want to know what it is to find them in myself, to exchange this trinket of a body-mind that I've identified with and that I've valued so much for so many years, to finally trade that in for its upgrade, to trade this broken old thing, this source of happiness and misery, but a constant instability, to turn it in and trade it for that which is pure, stainless, and homogeneous. Let's take our magnifying glass of reason. Let's look at these three qualities. Purity. What is purity? Stainless. What is there in stainlessness to love, to enjoy? And homogeneous. How can that possibly be? In Jnana Yoga, his 6th lecture on it, Vivekananda gives us talk on purity. And he gives us some insight on it. He says, thought is all important. Okay, what is in your mind is all important. What you think about, where your mind wanders, what it contemplates, what it likes, what it's attracted to. He says, these are important. Why? Because what we think, we become. What you are as a person is the sum total of all of your thinking up until this point. And for most of our thinking, it's about our attachments and our desires and how we're going to scrape them out of the rock in front of us. He says thought is all important. What we think, we become. So if you're in charge of what you think, you're in charge of what you become. If you can actively learn and grow from what you think, then you can actively become. There was once a sannyasin, a holy man, who sat under a tree and taught people. He drank milk and ate only fruit and made endless pranayamas and felt himself to be very holy. All right, so we have a sannyasin, a monk sitting under a tree, and he likes to teach people, likes to tell them how it is. Now he's, here I think Vivekananda is kind of conjuring that religious person that comes to our mind, that priest that wrapped our knuckles as children, telling us like it is, who got a great delight in being a moral teacher, who got a great delight in being religious. So we have this man sitting here, and then we've got someone quite different. In the same village lived an evil woman. Every day the sannyasin went and warned her that her wickedness would lead her to hell. All right, so he got way into it. Certainly we all can't think of anybody who stands in a quad at a university screaming through a blowhorn about everybody's sinfulness and going to hell. Well, that was this sannyasin's role in this old world, and this woman, who was an evil woman apparently, had to endure that constantly from him. And every day the sannyasin went and warned her that her wickedness would lead her to hell. And the poor woman, unable to change her method of life, which was her only means of livelihood, was still much moved by the terrible future depicted by the sannyasin. She wept, and she prayed to the Lord, begging him to forgive her because she could not help herself. By and by, both the holy man and the evil woman died. The angels came and bore her to heaven, while the demons claimed the soul of the sannyasin. And he protested, "Why is this?" he exclaimed. "Have I not lived a most holy life? Have I not gone around preaching holiness to everyone? Didn't I carry that big placard warning them they were going to hell? Wasn't I out there pointing at all of them and telling them what was wrong and what they were doing and how they needed to change their ways? What is this? How is it that I'm being born to hell by these demons? This is totally and completely unfair," he says. But then the demons answer, because while she was forced to commit many unholy acts, presumably by her karma, just by the condition of her mind, which had gotten so impure, because her mind was always fixed on the Lord, and she sought deliverance. So you see, the fact that she was karmically bound to commit to the deeds she was engaged in, yet her mind was always on God and a sorrow and praying for deliverance and for strength and for help, that her mind was on the beloved all the time, whereas his mind was what? She says, "But you, on the contrary," talking to this sannyasin, this religious person, "but you, on the contrary, while you did perform only holy acts," it's true, the actions you did were holy, "you had your mind always fixed on the wickedness of others. You saw only sin and thought only of sin. So now you have to go to that place where sin only is." The moral of the story is obvious, but it's a profound teaching. The outer life avails little. Your outer life avails little. What people think of you, how you're perceived, your status, the honor of your family, the greatness of your name, the list of your accomplishments, they account for very little. The heart must be pure, and the pure heart sees only good, not evil. We should never try to be guardians of mankind, or to stand on a pedestal as saints reforming sinners. Rather, let us purify ourselves, and the result must be that in doing so, we are a help to others. What you think, the world you've created for yourself in your mind, the idea of your own self in your mind, is very important, because what you think is what you become, the good and the bad and the mix of all of it together. But the important thing is not how you manifest as a person. The important thing is how aware of your innate purity are you? How free is love to act through you? How deep does the sincerity and earnestness of your love go? Where does it stop? At judgment of others? At making sure you save face? Let us rather purify ourselves. And what is that purifying? Purifying is the removal of me and mine from the heart. It's the removal of the yogi being in relation to everything all the time in this world. It's letting go of time, space, and causation and what you've managed to think you've created in those conditions which don't last, which are there for a moment. Let us rather purify ourselves, and the result must be that in doing so, then we help others. In the process of our own purification, we become helpful, not because we're the doer of helpful things, but because by purifying ourselves, that divinity manifests in us. That divinity, that purity of love, that purity of intelligence, that wonder of existence, that begins to manifest, to seep through the cracks in our ego. And that alone is helpful to the world. That alone can lift another man. In the Gospel of Holy Mother, she has quite a little conversation with several of her devotees one afternoon about purity. And it gives some further insights about this. Mother says, actually it's a little funny here at the beginning. So it says, the mother was seated in the porch of an adjoining house, and Nalini arrived, dressed in wet clothes. All right, so mother is sitting there on the porch of her house, and Nalini, one of her very close devotees and friends, comes to see her, and she's dressed in wet clothes. So she's showing up at church in a wet outfit. She had taken her bath because a crow, and this is in quotes, a crow urinated on her. All right. I love it when you pay attention to things in the scripture and you come up with stuff like this, and normally you just read over it and whatever. But then when you read it, you're like, what? And Mother has the same response. Mother sees this woman walking up to her in dressed, wet clothes saying, oh, a crow urinated on me. I had to go and take a bath. And Mother's response, it's wonderful. Mother says, I'm an old woman now, but I have never heard of crows urinating. She gets right to it. She's like, what? Your mind is impure. That is why you assume this impurity in yourself. Can the mind lose its purity without great sin? The sister of Krishna Bose had such a mania for cleanliness. While bathing in the Ganges, she would ask people whether the top of her head had gone completely under the water. That is an obsession. As a result, the mind never feels pure. An impure mind does not easily become pure. The more you emphasize your obsession, the more obsessed you become. It is true of all things. This takes us right back to what Vivekananda just told us. What you think about is what you become. If you're constantly in the state of thinking you're not good enough, you will never be good enough. As long as you keep yourself in this relative world and relating yourself to all these external things and coming up with a definition of who you are based on them, Pain is yours alone. You will never be free. You will never be pure. Because that thought of I, the ego self, will always be there to hold all the strings that are relating it to everything else in the world. And if it doesn't have the idea of purity, it'll be searching for purity. If it doesn't have the idea of love, it'll be searching for love. If it doesn't have that notion of diminished self, it will be king of selfishness. The more you emphasize your obsession, the more obsessed you become. It's true for all things. And another disciple who was in the room makes a good point. He says, wow, I've seen Mahapurushji, Swami Shivananda, one of the direct disciples of Ramakrishna. I've seen him fondle dogs and then go to the shrine room to worship the master. All right, in India culture, a dog is impure. And then if you touch this dog, you've become impure, and there's certain rites or of cleanliness and purity that you have to go through before you would go into a temple or a shrine. And this disciple saying, wow, there is something more going on here, because you're right about that woman and her purity and her obsession, because I've seen a Swami go and pet a dog and then go into the temple and worship the master. Perhaps someone would pour a little water in his hand and he would sprinkle a few drops over his face. At that time, Ganga water was used for everything. And Mother responds, it's quite different for them. How pure is their mind? All right? Not how clean were his hands after touching the dog. No, how pure was his mind, because it's in the pure mind that we find freedom. And the pure mind is a mind with no me or mine, which means that it is not the owner of your identity, which means that you are not in the mind attaching yourself to all of its relative adjectives. You don't borrow from the mind how you're doing, what you want, where you're going, what the purpose of your life is. Those are not things contained within mind. Those are things that are yours already as the observer, the witness of mind. Because remember, the self, that you, the authentic you, is outside of mind and is not bound by its relationships and is beyond the reach of time, space, and causation, as we read earlier. So Mother points out that this purity comes from inside and not from outside. This purity comes from inside and not through the rituals and the cleansings on the outside. Those are a stage when you are attached and deeply caught in the world. You go through those rituals of cleanliness to establish the idea of purity within you, to establish the idea of thinking about purity, of remembering your purity, of manifesting your purity. Yes, it's quite different with these holy men. How pure is their mind? It is the mind of the saint. They are gods indeed who live on the banks of the Ganga. Can anyone but gods live on the banks of the Ganga? Sins committed daily are expiated by ablution in the Ganga. So living on the edge of this relationship with the pure, the divine, always aware, always thinking of it, purifies the mind. Nalini pipes up here. Golap Ma one day cleaned the toilets in the Udbodhan office and then dressed fruits for offering in the shrine after merely changing her clothes. I said to her, "What is this, Golap Didi? Go and bathe in the Ganga." Golap Ma said to me, oh, and this is a wonderful teaching. Golap Ma said to me, well, why don't you do it if you so desire? Isn't that a nice way of saying, mind your own business? Why are you concerned about my purity? Why are you concerned about how I do things? And I bring this one up because I've spent time in the kitchen with the devotees. And how many devotees look over their shoulders to watch and make sure that everybody else is doing things exactly how they think they should be done? I've heard of a particular person who goes around telling everybody constantly, no, it has to be done this way, and it has to be done this way, and you should do it that way. Getting totally concerned about everybody else in the world around them, keeping the mind off of themselves. That's a disease of holy people, of religious people. That's the disease of that sannyasin who sits there telling everybody else about their purity and about their need for repentance and their need to change and their need to be pure and their need for this, that, and the other. The whole time making his own mind impure because he's dwelling on everybody else's impurity all the time. Look at Mother. She couldn't see a fault. Why? Because a pure heart never sees evil. A pure heart never sees fault. Mother responds to that. How pure is Golop's mind? How high-souled she is. Therefore, she does not discriminate so much between pure and impure things. That's just not where her mind is. She does not at all bother about rules regarding external purity. This is her last birth. In order to acquire a mind like that, you need to be born again in a different body. Pure air blows for 8 miles on both banks of the Ganga. This air is the embodiment of Narayana, of God. The mind is rendered pure as a result of many austerities. God, who is purity itself, cannot be attained without spiritual practices. This removal of me and mine from the mind, it only happens through austerities. Austerities is the breaking of the ego. Anything that breaks down the ego is an austerity. So taking a cold shower, it's accepting something, getting rid of the idea of aversions and attractions, which are only pamperings of a self, an ego within. What else can a man obtain by the realization of God? Does he grow 2 horns? No, his mind becomes pure. That's the highest thing we can ever have, is a pure mind. Ramakrishna says pure mind and Brahman are the same. Pure mind and God are one and the same. There's no differentiation there. No, his mind becomes pure, and through such a pure mind one attains knowledge and spiritual awakening. Disciple. There are devotees who surrender themselves to God fully and do not practice austerities. How do they attain this state? Well, so there's another path. Mother says that they surrender themselves to God. And what does that mean? To lay down your ego before the divine. They surrender themselves to God, and that they live placing implicit trust in Him is their spiritual discipline. That's austerity. Obedience to what you know is right. Surrendering yourselves to the will of your ideal, your highest ideal of love, intelligence, and being. Whether that be a Buddha or a Christ, any of the avatars, real or otherwise, doesn't matter. If you place implicit trust in that, and you surrender yourself to that highest ideal, that is your spiritual discipline. Naren said, "Let me have millions of births. What do I fear?" That's that removal from time, space, and causation of the self, to understand who you are, the authentic reality. I am that unchanging, ever pure, ever free, beloved self. The one in all, undivided, one without a second. Let me have millions of births. What do I fear? It is true. Does a man of knowledge ever fear rebirth? He does not commit any sin. There is no selfishness in him. He has let go of the idea of a small person in a body and mind whose only needs are the needs and calls and cries of a body and mind. It is the ignorant person who is always seized with fear. He alone gets entangled and becomes polluted by sin, by selfishness. For millions of births he suffers from endless miseries, made available to him through the body, as we learned in the beginning. These miseries delivered to him directly through desire, an unwillingness to let go of things that are temporary, of things whose nature is effervescent, here for a moment and gone for a moment. For millions of births he suffers from endless miseries, he undergoes infinite pains, and at last he craves for God. Disciple. Yes, through experience he gets his lessons and then attains knowledge. Mother agrees with that through discernment, through looking closely at your experience and seeing what lasts, what doesn't last, what is real, what's not real. What was the effect of that action? Did it bring me joy in permanence? Did it bring me unhappiness? Did it bring me craving? What was its fruit? By that discernment, that paying attention, Mother says, yes, the calf makes the sound humba humba, I, me, me. It is the same sound even after the drums and other instruments are made from its hide. This is that story that Ramakrishna tells about a calf, and that it cries out, I, humba humba, me, me. And then it gets yoked to the cart for its life, and then to the plow, and then to the flour mill, and then when he dies, they take the skin and turn it into drums, and he says at the end, the sound it makes is tuhu, you. So as you go through the suffering of life, if through discernment and careful consideration, you look for the words in the scriptures in the events of the day, you look for the eyes of your beloved in everyone around you, you search out love, you search out service, you search out those things that are not I, but you. Yes, through that practice, you come to that knowledge. So that's purity. Purity happens within you. It's the removal of your ego from yourself, because it's only your ego that is constantly annoyed with people. That's only your ego that can be angered or thrown off balance. When you walk into a room and someone annoys you, don't sit there and think, oh, they are so annoying. Remember that it's only your own fault inside that can be annoyed. Your sense of I, your sense of ego, your sense of me and mine. That's the only thing that can become angered, that can become jealous, that can become annoyed, that can become impatient. And Mother does that to you, not to show you how annoying other people are, not even to show you how annoying you are. But Mother gives that to you so that you can identify the boundary of your love, the boundary of your growth. She shows you through that annoyance where you need help in surrendering to your highest ideal. Who is there to annoy, and who can be annoyed? It's ego alone that causes all these relationship problems. Ego alone. And when our ego gets so big it starts picking on those around us, that's trouble. And Golak Ma tells you the right way to deal with it. If that's what you want to do, then you go do it. Mind your own business. Stainless is the other thing that the yogi enjoys about this divine being, that he contemplates and thinks, what is it to be stainless? The Avadutta Gita 7:11. The self is the auspicious moment, devoid of the auspicious and inauspicious time. Stainless. Stainless is no lasting echo of dirt, no mark left from sin. And he makes a very interesting point here, that the self is this auspicious moment, this moment that you are in right now, this moment that has never ended and never began, through whom everything passes. This moment is always pure. Why? Because it is always here and now. It doesn't carry the past, the karmas, the implications, the definitions to make this moment what you think this moment is if you ask your mind what this moment is. No, this moment is always pure. It is untouched by the effects of the past. This moment is pure because it's untouched by the desires of the future. It sees nothing wrong in itself that needs to be corrected. The moment never changes. There is no change in the moment. It's only when you record the moment in the mind by attaching to it, and then taking that thing you've attached to and comparing it again to what is, that's where all of the trouble begins. That's where karma happens. But to be fully present is to be free of karma, because there's no past in the moment. And this moment is the self. It is God. It is the I am. I can't tell you how happy I was the first time that thought occurred to me, that realization that I didn't have to go look for God to touch him or her. That I didn't have to go find God to take my refuge in him or her. That this moment, so constant, so steady, so unchanging, so humble, so demure, so quiet in the background that I forget about its reality, suddenly becomes the prominent thing in life. This is your dance with the beloved. This is God. She's everything you're looking at, everything you've ever known, but can't be found through the body and mind. This is an intuited knowledge of being, when your whole body and mind become a receiver of the presence of the moment. There are no unhealthy habits in the moment because there are no habits in the moment. It's not controlled by attachments or desire. So what do we do in the moment? You manifest. Manifest love, it's your nature. Manifest intelligence, it's who you are. And keep your eyes and awareness on awareness itself, on this moment itself. Don't let thought tell you about the moment. Don't let your mind define it. Don't let cognition and analysis create desire in it. Find wonder in it as it is, good or bad, pleasant or unpleasant. And act from that place. There's this notion as we grow and as we act in the moment, one of the big tests is, are you going after the pleasant or the good? In the Gita, chapter 18, it says, that which seems like poison at first, but tastes like nectar in the end, is said to be happiness in the mode of goodness. It is generated by the pure intellect that is situated in self-knowledge. So doing what is good and not what is pleasant. Pleasant things are pleasant in the moment, but their fruit isn't good. Overeating, laziness, physical pleasures, drugs, alcohol, all of those things, they're pleasant, no doubt about it, in their moment. But when you wake up the next morning, that's the fruit of what you've done. So always be careful to choose what is good over what is pleasant. In the 5th chapter of the Gita, it says, the pleasures that arise from contact with the sense objects, though appearing as enjoyable to worldly-minded people, are verily a source of misery. Now, you don't have to accept that. If your mind is worldly and it wants to argue, oh, yeah, but those are my good times. That's what life is about for me. Excellent. It doesn't mean you need to stop that. What it means is you need to start thinking. You need to start paying attention. Because the scriptures aren't saying this because it's some ethereal, truth for religious people. It's saying it because it's the truth about these actions. In their extreme, they can lead, they can ruin your life. Certainly, I know someone who because of their attachment to drugs, has lost their family, lost their children, lost their money, lost their employability, lost everything. You may have enough control not to go that far, but you'll lose nonetheless. There is no peace, no steadiness, no fulfillment in the pleasant. It's only in the good. The pleasures that arise from contact with the sense objects, though appearing as enjoyable to worldly-minded people, are verily a source of misery. They're the source of a stain, because they leave an effect, a habit, which destroys, which tears down, which reminds you of that which is impermanent and all of the weaknesses associated with it, which convinces you that you are subject to it, that you are in the middle of it and powerless. O son of Kunti, such pleasures have a beginning and an end, and so the wise do not delight in them. No, the wise delight in the stainless. those things in the moment, free of past, free of future, pure manifestations of love, of the divine, uninhibited by me and mine. Let's take a quick look at homogeneity, the complete lack of ego. These wonderful two little scriptures here I want to close with from Swami Vivekananda. You know, the last paragraphs of all of his lectures are just a trip to the moon and back. So beautiful. Such flights into his mind, into his experience of being as a realized soul. In Inspired Talks, he says, space, time, and causation, they're all delusions. It is your disease that you think you are bound and will be free. That's your disease. If you at this moment think you're bound, oh, I'm so stuck, I can't do anything right, I can't get anywhere, It's a delusion. It's unreal. What a great thing to hear. It is a disease. It is your disease that you think you are bound and will be free. You are the unchangeable. It's the mind and body that change all the time. If you think you're changing, it's because you've got the eyes established in the wrong place. Swami Prabhupada told me one of the most beautiful things one time. He says, you never change. Your mind changes because of its close proximity to you. The mind grows perfect over time because of its close proximity to you. You, the unchanging, ever pure, ever free, impetus of being, self, you. Space, time, causation are delusions. It is your disease that you think you are bound and will be free. You are unchangeable. Talk not. That's a scriptural way of saying, shut up, stop, stop, sit down. This is Vivekananda talking. Talk not, sit down, and let all things melt away. That's the practice. That's meditation. That's dhyana. Talk not, sit down, and let all things melt away. They are all but dreams. This world is a dream. How do you know it? Because it won't be there tomorrow. Your brand new Mercedes tomorrow morning will no longer be a brand new Mercedes. It's going to be an old car. And when the new model comes out, all of that desire you just spent $90,000 fulfilling is gone. And you're going to have to come up with the next $90,000 to get the new model. Time, space, and causation are but a dream. They will melt away if you shut up, sit down, and let them. They are but dreams. There is no differentiation, no distinction. It is all superstitious. Therefore, be silent and know what you are. It's only in that silence of mind that you, your authentic self, can manifest. It is the only way you can be what you are, because the mind distorts. It's all delusion, because the mind is time, space, causation, if it's impure, if it has a sense of I in it. I am the essence of bliss. Follow no ideal. It's not outside yourself. You're not becoming something else. You are all there is. Fear not. You are the essence of existence. This moment is you. This moment in which everything lives is in you. You are not in this moment. This moment is in you. Pull your identity from the mind and it shrinks to a little blip. If you remember tube televisions, when you turn them off, and after a moment the picture would just collapse into that one little white dot in the middle of the screen, which would slowly just fade out. That's what happens to this whole world at the moment of enlightenment, when you've removed the sense of I, when you've overcome the sense of me and mine, and you realize yourself to be the observer outside of mind, within which mind exists, within which this world exists. It falls to that little white dot and melts away. You are the essence of existence. Be at peace. You see, your peace comes from this knowledge, from relaxing into this knowledge and letting go. Do not disturb yourself. You see, only you can disturb yourself. Others can't disturb you. Conditions can't disturb you. You choose a condition and you let it disturb you by having a preference, by taking into an account a cause and effect on you, the ego, in that deluded state. Thrown yourself into imbalance, which can only be experienced through the body, this happiness and misery. You never were in bondage. You never were virtuous or sinful. Get rid of all these delusions and be at peace. Who is there to worship and who worships? All is the Atman. To speak, to think, is superstition. Repeat over and over, I am Atman. I am Atman. Let everything else go. I know the way you can get when you've not had a drink of love. Your face hardens. Your sweet muscles cramp. Children become concerned about a strange look that appears in your eyes, which even begins to worry your own mirror and nose. Squirrels and birds, they sense your sadness and they call a very important conference in a tall tree. They decide which secret code to chant to help your mind and your soul. Even angels fear that brand of madness that arrays itself against the world and throws sharp stones and spears into the innocent and into one's self. Oh, I know the way you can get if you have not been drinking love. You might rip apart every sentence your friends and teachers say, looking for hidden clauses. You might weigh every word on a scale like a dead fish. You might even pull out a ruler to measure from every angle your darkness, the beautiful dimensions of a heart you once trusted. I know the way you can get if you have not had a drink from love's hands. That is why all the great ones speak of the vital need to keep remembering God. So you will come to know and to see him as being so playful and wanting, just wanting to help. That is why Hafiz says, bring your cup near to me. For all I care about is quenching your thirst for freedom. All that a sane man can ever care about is giving love.